Brian Shaffer, born on February 25, 1979, in Columbus, Ohio, was the elder of two sons to Randy and Renee Shaffer. His father was an electrician, while his mother worked as a nurse. Brian shared a strong bond with his younger brother Derek, and was especially close to his mother. After graduating from high school in 1997, Brian, on his mother's advice, transferred to Ohio State University to study medicine. He earned his bachelor's in 2003 and continued in medical school, ranking among the top 10 students by 2005. Despite his academic success, music was at the heart of Brian's life. A devoted Pearl Jam fan, he even had their Stickman logo tattooed on his arm. On his MySpace page, he once wrote, "I really love music, and this whole doctor thing is really just a job, only temporary, until I get my band together and put out a record." In 2005, Brian's life took a difficult turn when his mother, Renee Shaffer, was diagnosed with cancer. She passed away in March 2006 during his second year of medical school. During this challenging time, Brian found comfort in his relationship with Alexis Wagoner, a fellow second-year medical student. Before Renee's passing, she had gifted Brian and Alexis a trip to Florida for Christmas, their last holiday together as a family. The couple eagerly planned every detail of the vacation, and rumors circulated that Brian intended to propose to Alexis during the trip. For Brian, the vacation seemed like a chance to find some light in the midst of his struggles. At the start of Ohio State University's spring break on Friday, March 31, 2006, Brian Shaffer planned a night out with his friend and former roommate, William Clint Florence. Earlier that day, Brian invited his brother Derek to join, but Derek already had plans with his fiancée. Although Brian was exhausted from pulling all-nighters for exams earlier in the week, he and Clint decided to go out. At 9 p.m., Brian met up with Clint, and the two went to Brian's apartment to pre-game before heading to the South Campus Gateway complex around 10 minutes away. Their first stop was the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular student bar known for its cheap drink deals. While there, Brian stepped outside to call his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, who was visiting family in Toledo before their planned Miami trip on April 3rd. He left her a voicemail at 9:56 p.m., saying he loved her and couldn't wait for the trip. Before we continue exploring Brian's final hours, here's a tool that's been genuinely helpful while researching cases like this. Opera's browser with its built-in AI feature, Aria. With Control+/ on Windows or Command+/ on Mac, I can launch Aria's command line to summarize sources, generate image ideas, or explore deeper context without opening new tabs. With image generation, I can create thumbnails from prompts like Moody City Street at 2 a.m., and image recognition helps identify blurry screenshots, ideal for analyzing scenes. When juggling 30 or more research tabs, maps, timelines, interviews, tab islands group them by context, project, or theme. I keep one for each theory, easily expanded or collapsed. Split screen lets me view two pages side by side, Brian's timeline on one, footage or notes on the other. And video pop-out allows me to float clips like the escalator footage anywhere on screen while I keep working. Opera also has a detachable player that supports Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple Music, and more. Great for scripting with music, and it auto-pauses when video plays. Opera really streamlines how I build these deep dive stories. Try it via the link in the description and pinned comment. After leaving Ugly Tuna, they stopped at Short North Tavern around 10:30 p.m. for another drink. From there, they headed to Brothers Bar and Grill, where they met more friends, including Meredith Reed. Clint's friend Meredith was reportedly more than just a friend, as they were often seen together and rumored to stay at each other's homes. The group spent most of the night at Brothers before Meredith drove them back to Ugly Tuna around 1:15 a.m. CCTV footage captured the trio on the escalator to the bar's second-floor entrance, with Brian leaning on the handrail. Inside the bar, Brian separated from Clint and Meredith, saying he was going upstairs to check out the band that was playing. While some reports suggested he might have gone to talk to the band, it was later clarified he didn't know them personally. Around 2 a.m., as the bar prepared to close, Clint and Meredith began searching for Brian, who had separated from them earlier. They called his name and checked the men's restroom, but couldn't find him. Unable to reach Brian by phone, they assumed he had left without telling them and waited outside, hoping to see him exit. When he didn't appear, they left the bar shortly after 2 a.m. Surveillance cameras captured Clint and Meredith leaving, but Brian was not seen among those exiting. On Saturday, Alexis called Brian to discuss their vacation plans, but her call went straight to voicemail. Thinking he was sleeping off the previous night's drinks, she wasn't too worried at first. However, as her later calls also went unanswered, her concerns started to grow. On Sunday, Alexis returned to town and went straight to Brian's apartment. His car was parked outside, and everything inside seemed normal. She waited there for hours until Brian's brother Derek arrived after being sent by their father. Derek hadn't heard from Brian all weekend either. The apartment showed no signs of anything unusual. Everything was in order. By Monday, when Brian failed to show up for their scheduled flight to Miami, it was clear something was wrong. With his phone still going straight to voicemail and no sign of him, Randy reported him missing to the Columbus police. At the time of his disappearance, 27-year-old Brian Shaffer stood 6'2", weighed 160 to 170 pounds, and was dressed in an olive green polo shirt layered over a long-sleeved white shirt, blue jeans, and white Adidas tennis shoes. He had light brown hair, wore wire-framed glasses, and had a Pearl Jam tattoo on his upper right bicep. Investigators began their search at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, where Brian Shaffer was last captured on security footage at 1:55 a.m., standing near the top of the escalator outside the bar. The footage shows him casually chatting with two women, Brighton Zatko and Amber Ruick. Amber, Clint's teaching assistant at the time, had studied alongside Clint and Brian during their undergraduate years. After saying goodbye to the women, Brian appeared to turn toward the bar entrance, which was outside the camera's view. The two women remained in the camera's frame and did not watch him leave or look in his direction. They assumed he was heading back inside, but couldn't confirm if he re-entered. No bar staff or patrons reported seeing Brian after this encounter, leaving a critical gap in the case with no clear evidence that he returned to the bar. Investigators reviewed footage from nearby bars, but found no signs of Brian. Flyers featuring Brian's picture, along with details of his Pearl Jam tattoo, were distributed widely. The search expanded with officers accompanied by K9 units, combing the surrounding areas, but Brian seemed to have vanished without a trace. The security setup inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona included a mix of stationary low-definition cameras, manually operated cameras, auto-panning cameras, and motion-activated systems. The stationary camera aimed at the escalator, despite its low resolution, was considered reliable and unlikely to have missed someone. Investigators briefly considered the possibility that Brian may have changed clothes or disguised himself inside the bar to avoid being recognized on camera, so they reviewed the escalator footage frame by frame to look for any sign of such a change. Detective Andre Edwards ruled out the disguise theory, saying, "I can say with 100% certainty that Brian Shaffer did not go back down that escalator." Among former patrons of the Ugly Tuna Saloona, it was well known that an emergency exit inside the bar, located on the right, had stairs that led straight down and out of the building, exiting near the right side of the bar's main entrance. This door was often left open so people could step out to smoke or make a phone call. Inside the building, two key cameras monitored the bar, one fixed on the main bar area and another positioned to pan across the emergency exit. If someone used the emergency door, an alarm was supposed to sound, prompting the camera to automatically shift and capture that area. However, it was widely known that the alarm either didn't work or was routinely turned off after regular business hours, a common practice in many bars, where customers frequently triggered alarms by mistake. Since Brian's disappearance occurred early on a Saturday morning, it's likely the alarm had been turned off at the time. The camera with an automatic pan cycle could also be manually overridden. It was later noted that the operator had, in fact, overridden this cycle several times throughout the night. This suggests that during certain moments, the camera may have been pointed away from key areas, possibly at the exact time and place Brian could have exited. Law enforcement did review the available footage from those cameras, and it reportedly showed no sign of Brian leaving. However, that footage was never released to the public. There's a possibility that Brian re-entered the bar to retrieve something and then exited through the emergency door. If the camera system failed at the right moment, or if the alarm was disabled, he could have left completely unnoticed. Oddly, the two police officers seen on the escalator footage did not recall anything unusual or significant that night. Nearby bars like Sloppy Donkey, Mad Mex, and Lucky's Stout House had security cameras that captured footage of the surrounding area. However, no footage was ever found showing anyone exiting through those connected spaces. Another potential exit route, not covered by cameras, was a door not typically used by the public, located a short distance from where Brian was last seen. This door led to a hallway containing an elevator and a stairwell, which connected to a construction site with an exterior exit, as well as to other exits, such as the employee service door and the adjacent Mad Mex bar exit. According to Detective Bruce Beard, there was a false wall in front of the hallway leading to the construction area. He noted that the space was difficult to navigate, even while sober, making it highly unlikely that Brian could have exited through the construction site. Others have questioned that possibility entirely, pointing out that two police officers visible on the CCTV footage near the escalators likely would have intervened if Brian had attempted to use an unauthorized exit within their view. The Ugly Tuna Saloona featured a small patio area on the second floor, raising the possibility that Brian may have gone outside and used it to jump down. However, this scenario appears unlikely due to the significant drop. A fall from that height would likely have resulted in serious injury or death. Right after Brian's disappearance, the CPD activated a pinging service on his phone through Singular Wireless. The phone company explained that pings would only register if the phone was turned on, as they reflected the network's ability to connect with the device. It was initially confirmed that Brian's phone was turned off by 2:01 a.m., when Meredith called using Clint's phone. Since then, on Saturday until Monday evening, there was no activity. By Monday evening, the pinging service began communicating with the phone, registering a signal from a cell tower near Kenny Road and West Lane Avenue. Initially, it consistently pinged the Lane Avenue tower, suggesting the phone remained in that area for a time. Over the following weeks, multiple pings were recorded, indicating the phone stayed within the general West Columbus area. Eventually, it began pinging towers in the more specific West Belt region, suggesting it was on the move. Later, it communicated with towers in Hilliard and eventually pinged near Scioto Darby Creek, which sits at the edge of Hilliard. These pings allowed police to triangulate its approximate location, and the CPD even conducted a search near Scioto Darby Creek Road. The pattern of pings showed a consistent westward progression, which implied the phone wasn't stationary. Investigators concluded it was likely traveling in a car, and this movement aligned with possible exit routes out of Columbus. Based on these pings, detectives concluded that the phone had to be turned on to communicate with the towers. It may have had enough signal to ping, but not enough to receive calls, which could explain why it never rang during that time. Phones at that time required brand-specific chargers, which weren't universal, suggesting the phone may have been deliberately charged or turned on and off to conserve battery life. Some believe that Brian was using the phone himself. Others suggest a passerby may have discovered it, turned it on, charged it, or even given it away. There's also the possibility that whoever harmed Brian kept the phone and managed its power usage during that period. 5 months after Brian's disappearance, Alexis placed her usual late-night call to his phone around 11:30 p.m. She and Randy had been paying his phone bill, hoping that he might use it if he were alive. Until that night, every call had gone straight to voicemail. But this time, the phone rang 3 or 4 times before going to voicemail. Startled, Alexis called again, with the same result. She asked her brother to try calling, and his call also rang through. Alarmed, she immediately contacted the CPD and reached out to Randy. Soon, Randy, Derek, Alexis, and local officers were all trying Brian's phone. The last successful ring happened between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., but by 8 a.m. the following morning, the phone had returned to going straight to voicemail. 2 days later, on September 10th, Brian's phone began ringing again, this time off and on, starting at 8 a.m. and continuing throughout the day. Singular Wireless later explained that the ringing could have been caused by a computer glitch or a nearby tower being busy. The activity ultimately failed to provide any solid leads, and the pings eventually stopped. After Brian's disappearance, those who had seen him that evening were asked to take polygraph tests, including his father and Meredith Reed. Both passed their tests, as did others who were questioned. However, Clint Florence, Brian's close friend, refused to take a polygraph. Neil Rosenberg, Clint's attorney, later addressed this refusal in an email to private investigator Don Corbett. Rosenberg stated, "Clint has cooperated with the authorities. Clint does not know the whereabouts or what happened to Brian." He further wrote, "If Brian is alive, which is what I'm led to believe after speaking with the detective involved, then it is Brian, and not Clint, who is causing his family pain and hardship." According to Rosenberg, the decision not to take the test was made on his recommendation, not because Clint was being deceptive. Derek Shaffer, Brian's brother, stated, "I've always thought he definitely knows something, just won't come forward with it." Brian's father, Randy, also wrote letters to both Clint and Meredith, pleading with them to come forward, even if it meant breaking a promise they had made to Brian. Further complicating matters was Clint's refusal to comply with a grand jury subpoena. When the subpoena was issued, investigators prepared a list of questions for Clint. One investigator later recalled, "We had Clint subpoenaed down to the grand jury. We had a list of questions that we wanted to ask. We gave it to his attorney. His attorney came back and says he doesn't want to talk. We're going to take the fifth." In an effort to raise awareness, Pearl Jam's lead singer Eddie Vedder, one of Brian's favorite artists, pleaded for information at a Cincinnati concert later that year, but it led to no new leads. One of the earliest false sightings came just days after Brian's disappearance, when someone reported seeing a homeless man resembling him at a local 7-Eleven. Detective Hurst reviewed the security footage and determined it was a case of mistaken identity. Another sighting occurred in Michigan, where a girl on a road trip claimed she saw a waiter with a Brian S. name tag who looked exactly like Brian. Police investigated the restaurant but found no one by that name employed. The sighting was ultimately dismissed, likely due to a misread or borrowed name tag. In 2019, a photo of a homeless man in Tijuana, Mexico, sparked new speculation due to his resemblance to Brian. Columbus Station 10 TV sent the image to Detective Blanche Tucker, who forwarded it to the FBI. Facial recognition analysis confirmed the man was not Brian Shaffer. In September 2008, Brian's father, Randy, was tragically killed when a tree branch fell on him during a windstorm. Soon after Randy's obituary was posted online, a condolence message appeared reading, "To Dad, love Brian, from US Virgin Islands." However, police traced the message to a public computer in Franklin County and confirmed it was a hoax. From early on, some speculated that Brian may have chosen to disappear, as he often spoke of leaving it all behind to live a laid-back life in places like St. John or St. Thomas. That possibility carries more weight given Brian's emotional state. Just 3 weeks before his disappearance, he lost his mother to cancer. He asked his girlfriend Alexis to run away with him, then days later told her to move on, saying he didn't know when or if he'd get better. Although Brian had dinner with Randy the night before he disappeared, private investigator Don Corbett later confirmed there was ongoing tension between them. They reportedly argued over Renee's life insurance, and Randy had recently said he wouldn't cover the rest of Brian's medical school. Brian was also carrying $25,000 in credit card debt and never deposited a $4,500 tuition check from Randy. Unverified claims, mentioned in the True Crime Garage podcast, suggested Brian was also upset about Randy's romantic involvement before Renee's death. Brian had a history of disappearing without explanation, sometimes wandering off during nights out or taking unannounced trips for days. He also tended to avoid confrontation, often walking away from stress or arguments. He spoke Spanish and was rumored to know someone in Puerto Vallarta. With his wallet and photo ID on him the night he vanished, it's technically plausible he could have flown to a US territory like the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico, which don't require a passport. This context is why some believe Brian may have used the service door or the exit connected to the nearby construction site to slip out of the bar unnoticed. Brian was visibly intoxicated after visiting several bars. Staging a clean, well-timed exit, especially through the construction zone with limited visibility and uneven footing, would be difficult even while sober. Brian was close to his brother Derek, and in a committed relationship. People don't usually vanish without a trace, especially not from those they're building a future with. There is no indication that he had secured resources or created an escape plan. No one reported seeing him with a bag or extra clothing items. In nearly 2 decades, no credible sighting, message, or paper trail has surfaced. Creating and maintaining a new identity, cutting off all ties, and never slipping up requires exceptional discipline and planning. Brian didn't withdraw money, leave behind a note, or take preparatory steps that others who vanish intentionally often do. According to this theory, Brian made it home and got into an argument with Clint, possibly fueled by alcohol, which may have gotten out of hand. Clint then allegedly disposed of the body. Proponents of this theory claim that Clint reportedly told a Lexus Wagoner that Brian was missing, yet told police he believed Brian had made it home. Some claim Clint took Brian's car without checking if he was home, though there's no verified evidence to confirm this. About a month after Brian's disappearance, there was a break-in at his apartment, and a TV and DVDs were stolen. While police initially considered it a random burglary, the targeted nature of the incident, particularly since no other nearby units were affected, suggests something more deliberate. The intruder left no trace and likely wore gloves, indicating a degree of planning and familiarity. Some believe this was not a simple robbery, but an intentional act, possibly by someone close to Brian, either to search for something specific or to remove evidence. To me, refusing the polygraph seems like a smart legal move, as these tests are scientifically unreliable and often used to pressure rather than prove. Courts reject their results, and many attorneys advise clients, guilty or not, to avoid them. Clint's attorney argued that failing the test wouldn't prove guilt, but could have wrongly made him the prime suspect. He may have also declined for personal reasons, such as avoiding exposure of rumored drug use that night. In the end, refusing the test doesn't prove guilt. It shows he followed legal advice to avoid unnecessary risk. One of the most commonly accepted theories is that after his final recorded interaction with 2 women near the escalator, Brian may have attempted to exit through the service door at the back of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. If he was intoxicated, he might have mistaken it for a regular exit. In doing so, he may have entered the adjoining construction zone, an area with limited visibility and no cameras. He could have fallen into a shaft, pit, or unfinished section and become injured or unconscious. Others believe he may have crawled into a confined space, such as behind a wall, inside ductwork, or near the building's foundation, where he either passed out or succumbed to hypothermia. With construction resuming the next day, his body could have been unknowingly buried and permanently entombed beneath concrete. The fact that his phone became unreachable shortly afterward supports the idea that something happened soon after he was last seen on camera. Detective John Hurst once described the construction site as completely dug up. However, in later interviews, Hurst clarified that the site didn't contain deep shafts or dangerous drops. Still, the exact state of the site that night remains unclear, and no official photos of the layout have ever been released. Critics of the construction theory argue that police began searching the area by Monday morning and found nothing, and that no construction work had taken place over the weekend. By that time, the bar was open and operating, meaning foundational and structural work had long been finished. Any remaining construction was likely limited to interior remodeling, not major structural changes. Locals familiar with the area described it as a small 2-story building undergoing minor renovations. Some even argued that the space could have been thoroughly searched multiple times within an hour, making it unlikely that someone could have gone unnoticed. The idea that Brian was buried in concrete is widely considered unlikely, as pouring concrete requires the area to be completely cleared of debris. Even something as small as a piece of wood would typically halt the process. A body of that size would have been impossible to overlook. Shortly after Brian's disappearance, search dogs were brought in to trace his scent around the Ugly Tuna Saloona and the nearby construction site. Despite recent rains, the dogs successfully tracked his scent using clothing, starting from the back of the Gateway building and heading south. They eventually alerted to an area in the Wendy's parking lot behind the building, an area that had a reputation for being dangerous, where they also picked up the scent of urine and vomit. This tracking adds weight to the theory that Brian exited the building rather than dying inside it. One possibility is that after leaving the Ugly Tuna, Brian passed out in a nearby dumpster and was accidentally killed when trash was collected and disposed of. Although speculative, this theory would explain why no body was found. Moreover, had Brian remained inside the construction site or been buried in concrete, his phone would have quickly lost signal. The fact that his phone continued to ping after his disappearance supports the idea that he, or at least his phone, left the area and remained active for some time. After Brian's disappearance, Randy Shaffer consulted a psychic who claimed his body was near a bridge pier. This led Randy, Derek, and several others to search along the Olentangy River, which flows through Columbus near Ohio State University, but they found no trace of Brian. It's important to recognize that bodies lost in water don't always surface. Authorities did not search the river immediately, so by the time they did, his body could have been carried away. Although the Olentangy River is deep enough to drown in, it was considered too shallow to conceal a body, especially near where Brian disappeared. The river's slow movement and low head dams along its length further impede the flow of water and objects. Brian's apartment was located between the Ugly Tuna Saloona and the river. For him to end up in the water, he would have had to overshoot his apartment by several blocks, which seems unlikely for someone intoxicated. Another point against the drowning theory is that Brian's phone continued pinging cell towers after his disappearance. A phone submerged in water would have been ruined and unable to send a signal. One theory suggests that Brian Shaffer was a victim of the elusive smiley face killer, or killers, who allegedly target white, college-aged men who stumble out of bars and are later found dead in nearby bodies of water. These purported victims often share similarities with Brian. They are young, educated, intoxicated, and their bodies are discovered near smiley face graffiti, which the killers are said to leave at the crime scenes. However, Brian's body never being found makes him a rare outlier in such cases. Some believe that, drunk and vulnerable, Brian might have been lured away with promises of drugs or a party by an experienced killer who knew how to cover their tracks. The idea that he was targeted by someone skilled could explain why no trace of him has been found. The killer might have kept all evidence, including Brian, signs of a struggle, and DNA, inside a vehicle, ensuring no trace was left behind. Investigators briefly considered a possible link, but eventually rejected it, along with the FBI, which largely dismissed the existence of the smiley face killers. Critics argue that if men like Brian were being targeted, there would be reports of stalking or threats beforehand, yet such evidence is lacking. According to this theory, Brian left with the crowd that followed the band out of the bar. This group was estimated at 15 to 30 people, not a huge number, but enough to create confusion and block camera visibility. In later interviews, the band said it was so crowded out back that they had to be careful not to hit people while loading their equipment, suggesting Brian could have been easily hidden in the crowd. However, critics argue it's suspicious that Brian was the only one from that group not seen on camera, and the only one who disappeared. This narrative presents Brian as a partygoer with a wild side often overlooked in media coverage. His habits, blacking out from drinking and hitting on women, contrast with the image of someone ready to settle down and propose. Some argue there's no solid evidence he intended to propose to Alexis after just 10 months together. The proposal story may have been media-driven or possibly suggested by his father to shape a more sympathetic image after his disappearance. Given this side of Brian, it's plausible he wanted to keep the night going after the bar closed, possibly looking for drugs or another party. He may have stepped outside to meet someone, gotten into a car, and met his fate elsewhere. Both Julie Popovich and Brian Shaffer attended Pickerington Central High School in Ohio. Julie, a 20-year-old OSU student, disappeared in August 2005, while Brian vanished in April 2006, both within a year and near the OSU campus. Adam Saleh was convicted of her murder in 2007, based largely on circumstantial evidence. He has maintained his innocence, and some believe he was wrongly convicted. On the night Julie disappeared, witnesses reported seeing her with a tall man wearing a shell necklace and a blue polo shirt. Some speculate that this man could have been Brian Shaffer. Based on that, one theory suggests Brian may have witnessed something related to Julie's murder and was later targeted to keep him silent. However, authorities have not officially linked the two cases, stating there's no evidence beyond the shared high school and university connection. Once CPD released footage from one of the surveillance cameras, people began analyzing every frame. The footage gave rise to many alternative theories. One theory suggests that Brian placed something in Brighton's purse the night he disappeared. In the footage, he appears to reach into his pocket, glances around cautiously, and then quickly dropped something into Brighton's open purse. Some believe it could have been his phone, which was never recovered, and he did this so Clint and Meredith would assume he left the bar with her when they later tried to contact him. Skeptics argue that if he had placed something important like his phone in her purse, Brighton would have found and reported it. Others note the footage is too grainy to be certain. He may have simply been guiding her or making casual contact, and the item, if anything, might have been trivial, like a note, a key, drugs, or something else small. Many people have analyzed the footage, studying the behavior of those involved, and developed theories, often focusing on men whose actions seemed suspicious. Most of these theories suggest Brian was likely a victim of foul play, possibly drugged after separating from his friends inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona. One frequently mentioned figure is the orange shirt guy, seen repeatedly entering and exiting the bar. Law enforcement reportedly vetted him and confirmed he was a taxi driver. Another person of interest is a muscular man in a grey t-shirt, positioned near the handrail by the escalators. There are also rumors about two brothers present at the club that night who may be linked to Brian's disappearance. It's possible the police interviewed these individuals and found nothing suspicious, though the public has never been informed of those outcomes. Some who have examined Brian's phone records claim that one local landline number stood out. The apartment linked to that number was located just a short distance from where Brian's phone later pinged. A review of past renters revealed that one of Brian's friends had been living at that address at the time he went missing, though this person was not previously listed as a resident. Taken together, these details suggest that Brian called the number the night he disappeared, and his phone later pinged near the same location. At the very least, his phone was near his friend's apartment, possibly indicating Brian had been there himself. However, this claim has not been independently verified. After spending countless hours researching this case, I've reached a conclusion that on that particular night, for reasons unknown, Brian made a deliberate decision not to leave the bar with Clint and Meredith. Supporting this is the critical 6-minute window between 1:55 a.m., Brian's last confirmed appearance on camera, and 2:01 a.m., when Clint and Meredith exited the bar. After leaving, Meredith attempted to call Brian using Clint's phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. This indicates that Brian's phone had already been turned off or had lost signal during that brief but crucial time frame. This timing aligns with the likelihood that Brian had already descended to the lower level of the Gateway building, possibly making his way through the basement or construction area. His phone being unreachable strongly suggests that he shut it off deliberately, perhaps to avoid further contact with the group. We now know that the Gateway building had a construction exit at the time that led to Pearl Alley, accessible via a service corridor behind the Ugly Tuna. This exit opened toward the area behind Wendy's, near a parking lot often used by locals looking to avoid parking fees. Since Wendy's had closed by 11 p.m., the lot would have been quiet, dimly lit, and mostly empty by that time. I believe Brian used this exit and slipped out just before Clint and Meredith left the bar. The strongest physical evidence to support this sequence comes from the scent trail tracked by search dogs. They picked up Brian's scent at the rear of the Gateway building, following it south along Pearl Alley, and alerted to an area behind Wendy's, where they detected signs of urine or vomit. From there, the trail continued along Pearl Alley, in the direction of Brian's apartment, but eventually went cold, leaving no further direction. Brian's apartment was located approximately 480 meters away, a walk of just 6 to 8 minutes. If he intended to walk home, Pearl Alley would have been the less traveled route, providing distance from Clint and Meredith, whose cars were parked in the same garage as the bar's main exit. I believe Brian deliberately chose this quieter path to avoid them. It's also possible that around 2:11 a.m., after gaining some distance, Brian turned his phone back on. This would explain why it briefly became reachable again before going silent once more. If Brian had planned to meet someone, whether for an after-party, a hookup, or to purchase drugs, this would have been the most likely window for that meeting to occur. Whatever his intentions, something appears to have interrupted that plan. He may have been intercepted either voluntarily or involuntarily and never made it past that point. It's possible he accepted a ride or was attacked, especially considering the crime rate in the area and the vulnerability of a slightly intoxicated man walking alone at 2 a.m. As for what ultimately happened to Brian's body, the answer remains unknown. One possibility is that he was intercepted outside the bar, perhaps forced into a vehicle and taken elsewhere. Another theory, based on unverified reports, suggests that a dumpster behind the Ugly Tuna Saloona was never searched before being emptied. Detective Hurst later confirmed that its contents were transported to a landfill in Tennessee. If foul play occurred and Brian's body was disposed of in that dumpster, it's possible that crucial evidence, or Brian himself, ended up buried there. As for alternative theories, Brian's bank accounts and credit cards were never used again. For someone supposedly planning to run away and start a new life, such complete silence, financial and digital, is highly unlikely. And if Brian had taken his own life, it's doubtful his phone would have pinged again days later, let alone months after his disappearance. The theory that Brian might have exited through an unmonitored construction zone, walked south along Pearl Alley, and then met with foul play fits more pieces of evidence than any other. The idea that he was too intoxicated to make that walk doesn't hold up, as surveillance footage showed him steady and coordinated. The suggestion that he never left the bar defies the limitations of 2006-era surveillance technology, the building's multiple exits, and the complete absence of his body despite multiple inspections. Ultimately, I don't believe Brian chose to run away or fake his disappearance. Nor do I believe he died inside the Gateway building. All signs point to him deliberately avoiding a group he no longer wanted to be with, slipping out through a hidden route and trying to walk home. Somewhere along that walk, or during a planned stop, something happened. He vanished, not because he intended to, but because someone else made sure he wouldn't be found. So what do you guys think really happened? Did you know you can now become a knight, lord, or even a king by joining my Patreon or becoming a channel member? Check out the perks for each tier, and thank you for your support.